Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Conversation with the Middle East Monitor. I'm your host, Naseem Ahmed. Today we have a really inspiring story to share with you. A story about planting trees, olive trees. And joining me is Cyrus Copeland, the Executive Director of Treedom for Palestine, not Freedom for Palestine, Treedom for Palestine, an initiative that has recently made headlines with a remarkable achievement through a powerful documentary film, Where Olive Trees Weep, which offers a poignant look into the resilience of Palestinian people under Israeli occupation. Treedom for Palestine has raised enough funds to plant 1,000 olive trees in the occupied West Bank. And as I said, I am joined by Cyrus Copeland, who is the Executive Director of Treedom for Palestine. Thank you for joining us, Cyrus.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Cyrus is a writer, non-profit pioneer. He's an author and a speaker. Born in Washington, D.C., he moved to Iran with his family at the age of 10. I'm giving you this backstory because his backstory is really interesting. We will be speaking about his backstory. So when he moved to Iran, it was a time of tranquility before 1979 revolution, when he was uprooted from Iran. His father, Max Copeland, was imprisoned and accused of being a CIA agent during the dawn of the revolution. And he spoke about that in his book, Off the Radar. So as I said, so I brought you here to discuss this great initiative, Treedom for Palestine. But before we do that, as I mentioned, you have a very interesting backstory with your father, Max Copeland. Do you want to just give us some details about that and your book, Off the Radar, and how that's been an inspiration for you in initiating this project, Treedom for Palestine?
Yeah. So, right, before I became a nonprofit guy, I was a writer. I'm working on my fifth book right now. My last book was Off the Radar, about our family's history in Iran, wherein my father was arrested and tried as a CIA spy, and my mother ended up becoming the very first female attorney in the Islamic Republic so that she could defend him against these allegations. My father died early in life, and maybe about 10 years ago, so we're at this point back in the States. My mom and sister and I decided we wanted to kind of commemorate his death, and to do so, we planted a tree in his memory. We chose a red oak because my father loved autumn, and we chose to plant it in Valley Forge Park, which is a historical park here in the Pennsylvania suburbs, because my father loved history and the idea of planting with Valley Forge and George Washington. I think he would have liked that. So we planted this oak, and the act of planting was very interesting. I had never planted a tree before, and doing one late in life, getting down into the dirt with something organic, doing it in memory of someone, it felt transformative in a very personal way, and maybe I would say also a little spiritual at the same time. I found myself going back to visit the tree from time to time to check up on it, see how it was doing, how much it had grown, what it looked like, and realized that for better or for worse, I was now in a relationship with a tree. I'd never really thought about that. I'd never realized that something was possible, how you could be in a relationship with a tree, but in fact, I was. I loved it. I cared for it. It was, if not top of mind, then I was always kind of in some manner thinking about not just my dad, but how this thing, which was now growing in his memory, how that was doing. It wasn't, however, until I got to work on the book that I'm working on right now, that grew into something else entirely. I don't know if you Do you know any other writers, Nassim? Maybe you do. Generally, we don't like to talk about what we're working on, and that's no different with me. I don't know, maybe you've got some experience with that.
What I think writers generally, after they've published the book, of course, they love talking about it. But before writing, yes, you want to keep things, you don't want to disclose too much. That's generally the case. Is that also with you?
Yeah, I find like talking about it, the energy of what should end up on the page ends up being dissipated in conversation. I'm no different. I don't like talking about what I'm working on right now, but let me just plant the seed of what took me to the West Bank from a narrative perspective. Um, was this idea of tikkun olam. Do you know, are you familiar with it?
Yes, making the Earth better or healing the planet, something to do with healing the planet, healing Earth.
Yeah. I This was a new idea to me. I hadn't heard about it, but I wanted to go to that part of the world and explore what this idea actually means. It wasn't until I got there that I kind of knew what I wanted to do with it. And I knew what I wanted to do with it because I saw how the relationship that I had with a tree, I thought I was in a relationship with a tree. That the reality is the Palestinians and their relationship to olive trees blows everything else about what I thought it meant to be in a relationship with a tree out of the water. Their relationship to their olive trees is, I mean, it's so deep. It's spiritual, it's religious, it's economic, it's legal, it's environmental, it's communal. You won't you can't go to breakfast or lunch or dinner without olives or olive oil being on the table. If you're in an artist's studio, it would be very unusual for there not to be some portrayal of an olive tree on a canvas somewhere. It's just really multidimensional. I was very impressed by that. But it wasn't until I made it out into the West Bank and I saw a particular olive tree farm or a grove uh, that was that had been planted by a farmer whose name was Motaz 8 years ago. That the whole idea of what it means to heal the earth for me came together in a very personal way. And that, seeing that farm and what he had done with it on this dusty slice of land in the middle of nowhere was really the genesis of what became Treedom for Palestine.
Yeah, and I think we should put the olive tree within the context of Palestine itself. I mean, the olive trees is a symbol of Palestinian resistance in many ways. It's, as you said, it's a symbol of their resilience, and it's part of their life, their economy. Palestinian farmers depend on it. And the devastation since 1967 to olive groves and Palestinian farmers has been immense. I mean, if I was to quote you something like since 1967, Israeli authorities have uprooted more than 800,000 Palestinian olive trees, which is equivalent to raising New York's Central Park 33 times. In
Yeah.
addition, Palestinian farmers say that the Israeli forces permanently prevent them from accessing olive trees, cultivating their land. And this situation, of course, we hear about settlers burning Palestinian olive groves. And in 2023, last year, olive yields in areas isolated by Israeli barriers was reduced by 93% from previous years. So there's a real battle to save Palestinian olives from destruction. And the destruction of olive trees, of course, is part of a much broader resistance to the occupation. Is that how did you see that? Do Palestinians view their olive tree and the planting of olive trees as a form of resistance to the destruction of a real symbol of Palestine, which is the olive tree?
Yeah, so here you're getting into something that's very interesting ideologically, Nassim. And I love this conversation in the divergent ways that it can go for a number of reasons. But so you talk about the tree as a form of resistance. It is that. to many people. But when you start, it is that to many people, period, no but. And it is also more than that. The tree is more than a tool. The tree can be used as a form of soldiering, and they can be sacrificed in the way that soldiers are sacrificed. We tend to have a little bit more of a sustainable approach to what the olive tree means, and to make sure that the farming that we do of those trees is done strategically and sustainably, so that the olive tree, which should normally have an average of a 500-year lifespan, gets to live out its lifespan in its full glory. So, yes, there have been many losses in the form of olive trees, and inside of those losses, cultural losses, familial losses, biodiversity losses, environmental losses. If you kind of play out even just the environmental contribution that the olive tree makes to the well-being of the planet, because they live for so long, because they're an evergreen tree, because they're notoriously resistant to fire and forest fires, they are a real player in the environmental landscape. Multiply that over 500 years, they're very consequential. So what we try to do is use these trees not as soldiers, but to honor them and their DNA, their cultural DNA, and their environmental sense of possibility and potential as tools for environmental balance, for prosperity, for gender equality, and for communal strength, and to do so in a very strategic way. We plant them so that the trees remain safe for the duration of their lives, and that the farmers are also protected on the farms that we plant.
We'll talk about we'll talk about how you keep them safe in a while. I think given what's happening now, I think it's important to discuss the initiatives you're undertaking to keep the olive trees and the Palestinian farmers safe. But before we do that, and before you continue the point you're making, if I could just ask a point about the project itself of Treedom for Palestine. I mean, you're working with, you're collaborating with a number of Palestinian Farmers Union. Can you talk about the partnership with Palestinian groups? I mean, as far as I know, the Palestinian Farmers Union is a collective of something like 16,000 small-scale farms. Is that the case? Just speak a bit about the project itself and your collaboration with the Palestinian farmers in the West Bank.
Sure, yes. To back up Treedom for Palestine, what we do is we plant small-scale sustainable olive tree farms for vulnerable Palestinian farmers across the West Bank. We call these farms Freedom Farms. They consist of 250 olive trees planted, irrigated during the dry summer months, and surrounded by steel fencing for the protection of both the farmers and the trees. We work with the Palestinian Farmers Union. They are our partner on the ground, and it's actually a little bit more than 16,000. There are 12,000 small-scale farmers dedicated to prosperity and nonviolent change in the West Bank. They were the ones who designed the very first Freedom Farm, which was the farm that I saw in the West Bank that kind of sprouted into this idea of Treedom for Palestine. It was a farmer named Motaz, and they went to him with this idea of what would it look like if we planted a farm that directly met the challenges of farming under the occupation. And they came up with this idea. This is all the PFU, the Palestinian Farmers Union, that came up with this idea. And what we at Treedom for Palestine are doing is multiplying that. When I saw Motaz's farm, I knew it was both something simple and extraordinary. And when I met the president of the Farmers Union, he's a fellow by the name of Abbas Milham, very charismatic, very smart, very strategic. I don't know, I just kind of had a sense of ideological brotherhood with him, and it was instantaneous. And that feeling that as a writer I trust, which is, you kind of like get this electricity of being visited by a special idea, you know it when it's happening. I knew it when I visited Motaz's farm, and I knew it in his office when I met with him and Motaz, and we began to talk about the idea of a larger partnership and multiplying the efforts that they had so thoughtfully begun on this little slice of land in the West Bank.
And how are you managing? You spoke about ensuring security for the olive trees. How are you able to do that, given there is a settlers marching through the occupied West Bank last week, the Shin Bet head or Israeli security agency, he said the settlers are becoming even a nuisance for Israel's own security. He described them as Jewish terrorists, and there's been global condemnation of the settlers and their attack on Palestinian farmers. So given what's happening in Gaza, there's been a ratcheting up of violence and pogroms, many would say, in the occupied West Bank. How are you making sure that your project, your initiative is protected from the violence perpetrated by the settlers?
Yeah, we do that because they do that. The Palestinian Farmers Union is incredibly good, thoughtful, and strategic about what they do and where they plant. As our partner on the ground, they are in charge of vetting the locations to make sure that they are safe, a sufficient distance from whatever settlement might be nearby. And then how we do that even more specifically is by girding every one of the farms that we plant with steel fencing, which is, I mean, it's very strong. You can't just kind of like climb over it or cut it. And it is a deterrent, and it's been a very effective deterrent. So right now, as of today, there are over 75 Freedom Farms. They call them model farms at the PFU. We at Treedom for Palestine call them Freedom Farms. Over 75 Freedom Farms across the West Bank. All of them are still safe and standing and thriving.
Just speak a little about the impact it's had on the lives and the communities overseeing Treedom for Palestine. So what kind of effect has it had? Can you speak a little bit about that?
So I can tell you a little bit about, thank you for that question. That question is kind of, the answer to that question is near and dear to my heart. It's what kind of like keeps me energized about this process and what we're doing in the West Bank. Every Freedom Farm of 250 olive trees at maturity will produce about $36,000 of olive oil every year. If you multiply that out over the 500-year lifespan of a tree, of a single olive tree, that's $18 million of olive oil produced by just this one 2.5 acre. I'm not sure what it is in how you would translate that into.
Well, we have an international audience, so we have an international audience. So it's not just a British audience. The viewers are from all over the world. Okay. They can convert that to their own local, metric.
Yeah, I should thoughtfully know this, but I don't. Yeah, I know it in American acreage and I know it in Palestinian dunhams, but it's a relatively small tract of land. $18 million of olive oil is produced over the lifespan of the farm from just an investment that cost about $7,500. That includes the trees, that includes the irrigation system, and that the most important and expensive part of that is also the fencing. The other thing that it does is it supports several things. In addition to prosperity, there's gender equality, because half of the Freedom Farms that we plant are planted for Palestinian female farmers. So that supports their roles both in their families as well as their communities. We talked a little bit about climate action and how a single freedom farm, if you multiply out the amount of carbon that's recycled by a single tree, it turns out that an entire farm recycles 9 million pounds of carbon over the lifespan of its farm. It helps secure, freedom farms also help secure the land for their farmers. There's there's an unfortunate law, an Ottoman law on the books in Israel that says if a tract of land lies fallow for more than 3 years, legally, it can be claimed by the Israeli authorities. They have used this as a justification for doing so and for establishing settlements. However, by planting land, we make sure that that planted land stays in Palestinian hands. And lastly, there's this idea of building stronger communities. The olive oil, the olive harvest, as you may know, it's a thing, and it's a big thing in the West Bank. I think that it employs something like 80,000 families usually every year, and adds $175 million to the economy. So by the very simple act of planting, you are transforming lives and the environment in very consequential ways. The 1,000 trees that we just planted with the help of viewers of Where Olive Trees Weep, I did some I did a little bit of, I kind of multiplied that out just to kind of see what that was. And let me kind of read you the figures of just that particular tree, which we had done. We had planted these 4 freedom farms over the span of 2 days. Bear with me just a second. Oh yeah, so here we are. So these 1,000 trees with the lifespan of 500 years will collectively generate $144,000 of olive oil, $1,000 of olive oil annually. They will unite 15 generations of farmers for the harvest and cleanse 36 million pounds of carbon from the air. Thereby creating a version of Palestine where olive trees don't weep, but really thrive. And in doing so, transform the communities around them. So that was a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's not. I mean, you meant, I wanted to ask you about your collaboration with Where the Olive Trees Weep and the producers of this documentary, because they were really one of the great enablers for you to be able to plant 1,000 trees. How did that come about? I'm actually thinking of interviewing the producers of that documentary. How did your collaboration with them come about?
It came about through one of my board members who had heard about their movie and contacted them, asking them if they would be interested in collaborating with us in planting olive trees in the West Bank. And as it happens, in one of those really kind of like delicious turns of fate, one of the subjects of their movie was that farmer Mu'taz that I had mentioned to you, who was our very first freedom farmer. So I don't know about you, Nassim, but when I get signs like that, I'm a big believer in signs. I never think that accidents are just accidents. And the fact that they had profiled, there were over 20,000 farmers in the West Bank they could have talked to. But somehow, in a weird twist of fate, they profiled the one farmer who was our ambassador on behalf of Treedom for Palestine. And so that was kind of what got our conversation going. I saw the film. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it is a gorgeous, poetic, very moving account of what it means to be Palestinian under the Israeli occupation. It's won it's been screened globally. It's been seen by thousands of viewers across the world. Those thousands of viewers collectively got together and funded the planting of these 1,000 trees that we're talking about. The film itself has won 7 film festival prizes out of the 12 into which it was entered. It's just a gorgeous, poetic, very moving piece of movie making. The directors, if you'll be talking with them soon, you'll find out what I already know, which is that they're a really good interview. They're just really fun to talk to and equally passionate about this subject. It was a joy. It was joyous to partner with them. They're also going to be planting more farms with us in Jordan, in the Jordan Valley, close to Motaz, where his initial Freedom Farm was, in the coming weeks.
So, I mean, this is, of course, we're talking about this amazing project and just changing the lives of many Palestinians. But of course, all this is happening within the context of what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in the West Bank. Some, of course, will see, the sheer brutality of the occupation and what it means to be a Palestinian. Many will be moved, and some may even support your cause. But do you feel that, in the end, you're really pushing against an occupation that that doesn't allow for any hope for Palestinians to be able to see the olive trees grow and flourish and have an economy that is sustainable for the Palestinians to stay in their land? Because when you look at the backdrop of what is happening, you have one side who seems determined to expel all Palestinians from their territory, make their lives make Palestine uninhabitable for the indigenous communities. So when you see all that, I mean, how do you see your project going forward? Of course, there's extreme optimism with the documentaries you mentioned, which sparked the planting of 1,000 trees. You probably get more donations to plant more trees. But given the backdrop, what are your concerns looking ahead? I mean, we come to the end of our conversation. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, given what we're seeing in Gaza, given what we're seeing in the West Bank and the rise of settler violence. Many would say there really isn't much hope for Palestinians. How would you respond to that? And your mission is a mission of hope. You're trying to give hope by planting trees and giving Palestinians a way of living which is sustainable.
Yeah, so great question. This is the thing about Palestinians and Palestinian culture that is a truism. This idea of resilience is they have a monopoly on it. They have a monopoly on that idea, and it lives very deeply in their cultural DNA. They subsist on this idea. And the extent to which the olive tree is the perfect manifestation of that. This rugged, hardy, drought-resistant tree, which somehow, despite everything, manages to thrive in an inhospitable environment. It's not an accident that this tree is kind of like their perfect ambassador. You talked a little bit about settler violence, and since the war, settler violence against Palestinian farmers is up 400%. This makes what we do and how we do it even more important, and the steel fence, protective fencing that surrounds that farm wasn't a design accident. It's there to make sure that these trees and the farmers who tend them live to their full expansionary, fruitful glory. There's I don't know if you heard about this settler, Bilal Saleh. He was it's a Palestinian farmer whose name was Bilal Saleh. He was killed by settlers last October while he was harvesting the olives on his farm. Did that name ring a bell with you Nassim?
No, it's been so many. So unfortunately, I don't. But there's just so many who have been killed. So yeah.
Well, he was the first Palestinian farmer who was killed, and as I mentioned, he was killed harvesting his olives. That his death really took the wind out of my sail in a way. It hit home for me in a very personal way. I looked at pictures of him. I read stories about him. It deepened my commitment to doing what we were doing. Most recently, right before we planted these 1,000 trees for with the help of the viewers of Where Olive Trees Weep, we planted a freedom farm for his wife, who is now a widow. Her name is Ikhlas Saleh. She's thanks to the fact that her husband was killed, she now has 4 children that she needs to kind of like take care of on her own. Their family which was never well off to begin with. I mean, he's a farming family. He would go into Ramallah and sell time on a street corner. He was quite well known for that. He was known as Bilal the time seller in Ramallah, kind of an iconic figure. And so one of the things that we did was plant a freedom farm of both olive trees as well as grape trees for his wife, and in doing so, giving them a secure platform to earn money into the future, and to do it in a way which honored their dad at the same time and continued his loving heritage of what it means to be a Palestinian farmer who harvests olive trees in the West Bank. And most important, we did it safely for him so that what happened to their dad will never happen to any of the other freedom farmers who are protected with the safety of the steel fencing that we use, as long as we plant freedom farms.
So for our viewers, those who many will be interested in trying to help this great initiative, and what should they do? First of all, of course, watch the movie.
Yeah, the movie's amazing.
Watch the movie, but what else can they practically do in terms of supporting the planting your project? What can they do?
Yeah, so what can they do? There's a lot of talk about Palestine, and there's a lot of empathy about how do we help Palestinians in the long term become really established on their land and be prosperous and fruitful and build strong communities and strong women, all of that. From our perspective, the answer is very simple. It's you can plant. You can plant a tree. They can visit us on our website, read a little bit more about what we do, how we do it, about our partnership with the Palestinian Farmers Union. We are treedom4palestine.org. We talk about a lot of the things that you and I have been talking about, the challenges of what it means to be a farmer under the occupation, the hopefulness of what it means to use trees as agents of prosperity and balance. Our great hope, Nassim, and our mission is to plant 1,000 such freedom farms across the West Bank, and in doing so, help make an otherwise polarized Holy Land into a prosperous heartland for 1,000 farming families. The trees that we plant will outlive us. They will feed thousands of families. They'll send girls to college. They will bring communities together. And all this is happening in a very clean and simple and impactful way. It happens tree by tree. And so if you want to help Palestine and Palestinians from our perspective, here's what you can do. You can plant a tree with us.
Cyrus, that was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we finish, I mean, I saw something on your personal website, whether it's hiking a 1,000-year-old holy trail of planting freedom farms in Palestine. Cyrus follows his curiosities across the world and onto the page. So, what was your 1,000-year-old holy trail that you walked?
Ah, um, So that was part of the book that I'm now working on that I haven't spoken a lot
Ah,
about. But that thousand-year-old trail is a pilgrimage trail in Spain. It's called the Camino de Santiago. It begins in France. You hike over the Pyrenees and all the way across Spain to Santiago de Compostela, which is where St. James is buried. And if you talk to, have you heard about this, Nassim? The Camino?
I have heard about the community. Yes, yes.
Okay. It's the Camino. There are many different ways that you can walk the Camino. I happen to walk the classical one. It was a very transformative experience. And so for anybody who's got a couple of weeks that of their life that they don't know what to do, I want to give you more than a gentle push to walk the Camino de Santiago. And it's an extraordinary experience.
So we've just given a preview of your upcoming book, and
Inshallah.
inshallah. So I want to thank you again, Cyrus, for joining us, and thank you for tuning in for this week's conversation with the Middle East Monitor with me, Nassim Ahmed, and our guest, Cyrus Copeland. And see you next week. Tune in for another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. Bye bye.
Thank you, Nassim. It's been great chatting with you.